The larger economies of the world have been facing the financial crunch down. Certainly the effects are being felt across the region, and in Antigua and Barbuda, no different. What is Antigua and Barbuda doing to ensure that we remain financially sound and stable? This week on The Journal, we discuss the issue of finance, the economy, and public administration with Economy Minister, the Honourable Lovell. Welcome to The Journal, and thanks for taking the time to be with us.
Pleasure. Thank you.
It's 2013, and the budget 2013 has been presented to the people of Antigua and Barbuda after you would have heard what the people have been saying, what they'd like to see happening in terms of the economy of this Stone Island state. What has the feedback been like?
Yeah, I would say the feedback has been very positive. I've received feedback via text messages, email messages, and of course, people have called me and people have met me. The feedback has been very good, and I think most people would have captured and embraced the theme that we have sought to portray. And the theme that we have sought to portray really deals with certainty, confidence, and credibility. And those are three essential pillars when we thought of securing growth, and not just growth, but sustainable growth. And so we said securing sustainability and growth. So it's been very good.
How confident are you that we will see this sustainability and growth that you've been preaching about in the budget presentation?
I'm confident because we've taken a lot of very tough decisions because it was necessary for us. And I have to say that since 2004, when the UPP administration was elected and my predecessor, Dr. Court, held the position of Minister of Finance and the Economy, we started a process of reform at that time. And we've continued it. In 2009, we had to intensify it, or you could say formalize it in a way that allowed us to craft the NEST plan, the National Economic and Social Transformation Plan, which was our response to the global economic crisis. But all in all, I think we've taken the necessary decisions. Because you see, when you speak about growth, it's very important that you understand sustainable growth. When I say that, I mean, in the 1980s, we had growth averaging 7%. In the 1990s, we had growth averaging 3.3%. Between 2000 and 2004, growth at that time averaged about 2%. So the rate of growth had been declining steadily. When we took office, between 2005 and 2008, we saw average growth of 7%. And this was despite the introduction of personal income tax, the ABST, and that type of thing. No, the key to that had to do with confidence. The fact that we were putting a very stable foundation in place. Of course, in 2006, we were preparing for the Cricket World Cup. And so we saw growth at a rate of over 10%. I think it was something like 12% that we experienced then. And so after the global crisis hit us in 2008, 2009 and continuing, we experienced a severe decline in economic activity. And what we had to do through the NEST plan was to basically stabilize our situation, which we were able to do. And I can say happily, we are now turning the corner and we are returning to growth, but sustainable growth.
What is sustainable growth?
Right. Growth in the 80s and 90s was growth whereby we are seeing good numbers, but the fact is we weren't meeting many of our obligations. Example, we had growth, but we were not meeting our debt obligations. If we were meeting our debt obligations, we would have been paying approximately 33 cents on the dollar in interest payments, but we weren't making those payments. And so we didn't bother with it. So what was happening? Interest continued to tick. In 2009, when we went to the Paris Club, well, 2010, we went to the Paris Club, but in 2009, when we started our preparations for the Paris Club, over 50% of our debt was in arrears. And remember, more than 60% of the debt is domestic debt. So when people think of debt, sometimes they think of external debt, but we're talking about local creditors. So the first thing was we weren't meeting our debt obligations. Secondly, we weren't meeting our statutory obligations. Nothing was being paid into Social Security. Nothing was being paid into the other statutory bodies that required our payments on a regular basis where we were taking money from employees. And so for 28 years, even though there was growth, there was no contribution being made into Social Security in terms of the employer's contribution, and not even the contribution of the employees was being paid in. So that's not sustainable. because it was undermining, first of all, the foundations of the Social Security scheme. And secondly, no matter how you ignore debt and you ignore the interest, that does not ignore you. And so even though we were not paying attention to the debt, the interest clock continued to tick. So that's not sustainable, because it's going to come back to here.
I want to ask you then, the ALP more or less was a tax-free type of government. Now the UPP has introduced taxes, and back then we did not hear much about fiscal consolidation or job losses as it is common today. Now, would you say that the UPP then is a better government than they are? Not so much for politics, but the fact that we're now seeing things like fiscal consolidation taking place.
Well, I think in terms of policies, I mean, obviously I'm biased, but I think in terms of policies, I mean, we currently are pursuing policies which we consider to be sustainable policies. I mentioned the fact that people talk about a tax-free government. Well, no government is really tax-free. You're talking about the amount of taxes you collect and whether you collect indirect taxes or direct taxes. There was no ABST, which is a form of indirect tax, and there was no income tax, which is a direct tax. But in 1976, when the Labour Party administration abolished income tax, they immediately stopped paying their contributions to Social Security, because it all comes down to how much money does it really take to run the country. That's really the question. It's like a household, it's like a shop, whatever you have. How much money does it take to run this? If you don't have enough money, some things are going to suffer. Now, they abolished income tax, but in abolishing income tax, they could not meet their obligations to the Social Security scheme. And so it was really something where people thought that they weren't paying the tax. But in fact, you were paying your Social Security scheme through as government employees, but your payments were not being transferred or transmitted to the Social Security Board. And that happened for 28 years. So those are the sort of things that I think people need to understand. So that when you say tax-free, yes, there was no personal income tax, but then there were no payments being made into the Social Security scheme. And I can say that despite the difficulties that we've been facing, between January 2010 and today's date, we have paid more as an administration into the Social Security scheme than was paid in 28 years. That's a fact. For 28 years, with growth and prosperity, as we are told, nothing was paid into Social Security. Yet the Social Security scheme, they were honoring all the obligations that they had to honor. But it came to a point where it was not sustainable.
What is your government's strategy then to make all those wrongs right, especially with the Social Security scheme?
With regard to Social Security, we had an actuary who came in and he made some proposals. The proposals touch on the retirement age, the insurable wage, and the contribution rate. Now, we have deferred a number of the decisions which ought to have been made a long time ago, and I think we all have to accept that. Take retirement age. We have the lowest retirement age in the Caribbean at 60. In some countries, like Barbuda, the retirement age is 67. And they did that so that they would reduce the impact and force of new pensioners coming on the scheme, which they knew they would not be able to sustain. And that's with a government that was making its contributions in a regular way. So even with those contributions, they moved the retirement age because they understood for it to be sustainable. 60 was not a sustainable age. Then we had to look at the insurable wage. We have the second lowest insurable wage at $4,500. Most other places, the insurable wage is $6,000. I'm talking about the cap, $6,000, $6,500. We need to increase that. And then, of course, there's the contribution rate. Our contribution rate currently is 8%. Again, you look at a country like Barbados, where they have managed their Social Security scheme very, very well. Their contribution rate is 18%. Ours is 8%, 5.3. So we have to look to see how we can adjust that. So we have the problem where structurally we have not made several of the changes which ought to have been made over time.
What's taking you so long then?
Well, we have to make sure that what has taken us so long, we need to do it very quickly. And so I would say that those were difficult decisions because they have an impact. If you're going to increase the rate from 5% to 6% and from 3% to say 4%, then obviously there's going to be some pushback. And so we've had to think very seriously about that. And we're looking at increasing the rate, but we know that there's going to be some pushback. And there are going to be people who feel that we shouldn't do it. But we have to take those tough decisions.
Are you planning to hold consultations then?
Yes, well, some consultations were held when the actuary was here, and the different stakeholder groups were invited to send their recommendations to the summary of recommendations presented by the actuary. In other words, get some feedback. As it stands now, very few of the institutions or individuals who have been invited to make their submissions have done so. But I know that the intention is to get all of these submissions in response to the recommendations, to have a broader consultation with all the stakeholders and then to move forward.
The tardiness of some of these agencies could be as a result of, you know, the perception that government is just too tardy in getting things done.
Well, that would be one way of looking at it. But then if I think you're tardy, then why would I make you even more tardy by not submitting my recommendations when you're given a specific deadline? So we expect that they will. I think maybe it had to do with the fact that they were approaching the Christmas season and perhaps a lot of persons didn't get around to doing it in a timely way.
We hear about plans for economic growth from time to time. Now, the outlook on 2013, in keeping with the important need for economic stability, what's the real outlook on 2013? We're still not seeing monies being floated around like a few years ago, but what's the outlook?
And I think it's important that we understand the genesis of the current situation. The first point is that we are building out of the worst global crisis in nearly 100 years, certainly since the 1930s. Now, many people hear that, they gloss over it, they say, oh, we're tired of hearing about global crisis. But the fact is, you cannot get away from it. I mean, you look at what's happening in the United States and the UK and Europe. Now, why I say that is because of the interconnectedness of the global economy. If things go down in the United States, it affects China, because the United States is China's main market. It affects Brazil, because if China is affected, Brazil is not sending some of the raw materials and the iron ore or whatever they use in China from Brazil. And so everybody is connected. Similarly, as a tourism country, if the US economy goes down and the UK economy go down, those are our two main source markets. We get more than 70% of our visitors from these two main markets. So if tourism is our main industry and our two markets are down, you ask the vendors, we can bring the tourists here. They come on the boats, but the vendors will tell you they're not spending.
You've got to find a way to make them spend then.
Well, find a way to make them spend. If a man comes with $10 in his pocket and he spends all 10, I still don't know that there's going to be any mathematical formula to get him to spend more than $10. It's not that he comes here with 100 and he spends 2. The United States economy, because of the difficulties that they're experiencing, people are coming on these cruises, but they're coming on a very low budget. That's just a fact. So that's the first thing in terms of our position.
So then Antigua and Barbuda needs to find additional avenues, or we need to become more creative then. Because if tourism is failing, we need to find a way to bring monies into the country.
Well, tourism is not failing. The fact is, our two main source markets are having trouble in the economy. That's external to Antigua and Barbuda. It doesn't matter what we do. We cannot fix the US economy or the UK economy.
But the fiscal cliff in the US certainly has implications on our economy. But we cannot sit back and say, well, if this is happening in the US, then we'll continue to be facing challenges. We've got to find ways of making our economy here work.
Absolutely, and that's what we're doing. Now, first of all, what you need to do...
How are we doing that?
The first thing you need to do is position the country so that when the rebound takes place in those economies, you're stronger. And that means we have to focus on growth and competitiveness. We have to recognize that we have to be globally competitive. In today's world, nobody's going to be sorry for you because you're a small country, or poor country, or black country, or whatever. That doesn't work anymore. First world, second world, third world, those designations are now no longer relevant. We are considered to be an upper middle income country in the scheme of things. We rank number 62 in ease of doing business.
Is that good enough for you as finance minister?
62 is not good enough, but it happens to be number 2 in the Caribbean. But it's still not good enough. But we rank 34 points ahead of the average for the Caribbean and Latin America. Now, we're positioning ourselves because we looked at the 10 points that are used to grade countries with ease of doing business. So, for example, of the 10, we lead in 6. In other words, we're above the regional average. But in 4, we lag behind the regional average. And that has to do with cross-border trading. That's what happens at the port. It has to do with ease of paying taxes. It has to do with access to credit. and it has to do with registering a business. Now, we have interacted, and we have been able to get assistance from the International Financial Corporation, the IFC, which is a branch of the World Bank. They're assisting us. By the end of 2013, we expect that we would have corrected a lot of those, which would, A, allow us to improve our ranking in ease of doing business, but also we would have positioned ourselves to attract foreign direct investment more easily.
Stick it in there. When we come back, we'll have more from the Finance and Economy Minister looking at financial development here in Antigua and Barbuda, ensuring that our society remains sustainable. This is The Journal. I'm Sean Thomas. Stay with us. You are watching The Journal. You're watching The Journal. With us in studio today is Finance and Economy Minister, the Honorable Harold Lovell. We're into just about 15-20 minutes into the interview. We're going to be discussing the issue of public sector reform. Now, Minister Lovell, your government has been implementing certain strategies to sort of establish a unified public sector. In your estimation, what would you make of the public sector here in Antigua and Barbuda?
Well, I think the public
apart
sector,
from it being oversized.
Okay. But the public sector in Antigua, I think we have to be careful about broad brush answers. I happen to have the good fortune of working with some of the most dedicated and talented public servants.
You're lucky.
And people tell me I'm lucky, and I accept that I'm very, very fortunate. Preparing for this budget, it was not uncommon for us to work through the night, give many, many hours, 60 and 20 hours in a day. Those are public servants who are not demanding anything more than to get the satisfaction of their job. So if I had to describe the public service, I would say that the public service is in need of reform in terms of maybe better fit allocations. There are persons in jobs that I think we need to look at the question of retooling. We have to remember that the public service was structured and established during a colonial period. A lot of the job designations were relevant to what was taking place 40 and 50 years ago. Today we live in an information age. We live in an age where things happen at a moment's notice and things are very fast-paced. And the public service must respond to those changes. And we're in the process of carrying out those reforms. We're making the government more interconnected. We're making the government more responsive in terms of timelines, and these are necessary. We're also making sure that we remove a lot of the anomalies currently existing with the two-tiered service, with established and non-established. And we have a committee of permanent secretaries. They recently presented a paper to Cabinet for the merger of the two streams, and we hope that this will lead to less anomalies and a greater degree of efficiency.
You mentioned permanent secretaries. Are you of the opinion that permanent secretaries, this whole concept needs to be phased out and government employing or hiring more or less CEOs to run establishments like businesses should be run in order for us to see the true benefits?
Well, that's one option, and we're looking at implementing that. But we have a whole project of reform, and everything is on the table insofar as the structure is concerned. But whether you call them permanent secretaries or CEOs, the question is, what is the role of the chief executive in the organization? Currently, it's the permanent secretary. And I don't know it makes a big difference what you call them, but I think what you're referring to is bringing them on contract.
That's right.
And for maybe a 3-year period. That's something that we, the Public Sector Transformation Unit, is reviewing in collaboration with CARICAD, which is the regional body that looks at public service reform and assists the various governments in terms of their public service.
So you think this is the way for Antigua and Barbuda?
Well, I think it's certainly a good suggestion and one way in which we can raise the standard of our permanent secretaries. But again, I would caution the broad brush approach because again, we have some excellent permanent secretaries,
that's right,
you know, who could fit in quite comfortably as a CEO in any private sector or in Antigua or any public service anywhere in the Caribbean.
2013 has, in fact 2012, has seen a lot of ups and downs, particularly as it relates to jobs and the issue of job creation. We know that the situation there with the brewery, the demise of Stanford, debacle, of course, the insurance company as well, Kiko. Now, where is your government in terms of creating jobs? Of course, we hear that the public sector is oversized. We know that from time to time you've introduced, in fact, the public sector voluntary separation.
Severance, yeah.
Right. Will we be seeing this in 2013? But even before we go there, though, what's your plan in terms of job creation?
Okay, there are a number of things that you mentioned there that I think I need to address. First of all,
overstaffing.
Overstaffing. We recognize that there's a need to contain the public service. And we have been able to cut the size of the payroll. Between 2009 and 2012, we cut the payroll by 14%. We were paying something like $300 million just on payroll alone in 2009. Today we are down to, I think, 75 million. We've trimmed the public service, and we didn't do it in the traditional way of retrenchment. That's how a lot of people would have done it. We've done it by prudent management. Controlling overtime. Whereas we were spending nearly $20 million on overtime in 2008, 2009, we've reduced that to below $5 million today. Attrition, that means as people go off on retirement, we have allowed persons to go off on retirement without replacing every person who goes off on retirement. And we have restricted hiring to essential hiring. So there's been no non-essential hiring. So with controlling overtime, with attrition, and generally the management of other areas that impact the payroll, we've been able to contain that. I think that's very important.
You've been able to do that then, but what about the issue of creating opportunities for businesses to become, or the private sector in fact, to become the major source for employment as opposed to the government?
Right. Now, when we look at the things that we've done for the private sector, we have the Antigua and Barbuda Investment Authority. This was created, I think, in 2006 or 2007. The Antigua and Barbuda Investment Authority offers a whole menu of incentives and concessions, whether you're a local investor or a foreign investor. For small businesses, we have the Small Business Guarantee Scheme, administered by the Antigua and Barbuda Development Bank in collaboration with the Investment Authority. We've had the Mind Your Business series, run by the Investment Authority, training young business people and entrepreneurs in terms of the basic principles of business. When you look at the global average, something like 60% of all small businesses fail within 2 years. So that's a global average, and it's no different in Antigua. It's not every business that has a startup will have a successful end. What we have done is to prepare people so that we give them the necessary skills that will be needed in order to sustain their businesses. That's the first thing, the Small Business Guarantee Scheme. The Mind Your Business program for preparing persons. At the moment, the Investment Authority is also developing what's known as the Business Factory, which is like a business incubation scheme. We're hoping that this year more than 30 businesses will benefit from this business incubator or the Business Factory. We, as a government, have also encouraged in every way possible the development of small enterprises. We have a program whereby whenever the government is doing any of its programs, it seeks to use local small business enterprises.
Encouragement is intangible. What are some of the tangible things that the government is doing or needs to be doing to ensure the business sector remains buoyant?
Well, apart from the government using small businesses in terms of contracts, I mentioned the institutional arrangements. The institutional arrangements, access to capital. That's the Small Business Guarantee Scheme. That's one of the main problems businesses have. Skills, mind your business. That's the program. Helping businesses start up with regard to a feasibility study, helping them to do their accounts, helping them to do a business plan, giving them the necessary skills to survive. Those are the things in a tangible way that we've been doing. The business incubator that I mentioned, or the business factory, giving space to small businesses, small enterprises, so that they can operate and have a lot of their inputs taken care of by the government.
Sending home persons, job creation, of course, is still a very important one. Where is government in terms of
job
that?
creation? Given the realities of the global environment, we've sought to see what we can do locally. What is the quickest way that we can get jobs going? Construction immediately comes to mind. In trying to come up with programs that will be meaningful, we brought together some business people, and that's where the Construct Antigua and Barbuda initiative was born. We brought together a round table. I hand-selected a number of business people. We sat around the table and we said, how can we really get things moving? And the program that we said we'd focus on would be Construct Antigua and Barbuda initiative. In that way, the government gives up something, the hardware stores give up something, the banks give up something, everybody gives a bit. And we've been able to reduce the cost of residential construction by some 20%. Now, in doing that, we have stimulated residential construction. We're hoping that this year, 2013, we'll extend the Construct Antigua and Barbuda initiative to include not just residential construction, but also commercial construction. Those are construction jobs. We also have the Antigua and Barbuda Department of Marine Services. They will be building an office complex. It's taken us some time to get the necessary financing in place, but we now have things pretty much online, and on Factory Road, they should be putting up a 3-story office complex. The State Insurance Corporation, government is partnering with them to build the Treasury building, a brand new state-of-the-art Treasury building at the top of St. Mary Street. That's already been designed. The first contracts for the construction have already been awarded, and they expect to begin the clearance and the preparatory work for meaningfully doing the foundation by the 15th of January. Now, those are construction jobs, but at the end of the day, it's going to take really foreign direct investment. Foreign direct investment isn't easy to come by. You look around the region, it's not happening. That means you have to be, as you say, creative. The citizenship by investment.
Creativity takes you thus far.
Citizenship by investment, whilst we won't go into any details on that, the fact is that's intended as a means of attracting foreign direct investment by bringing high net worth individuals to Antigua and Barbuda and working with them through that program. We're also very hopeful that later this year we'll see a number of other projects start up. We have not given up on the Beaches project out at Long Bay. That's $140 million US that will be pumped into this economy.
Sandals have said to Antigua and Barbuda no.
They haven't. If you listen to the interview of Mr. Butch Stewart, he said he was ready at some point last year, but somebody else got your sugar.
But why would you allow somebody else to take our pie?
Well, it's not a question of allowing somebody to take your pie. Investment doesn't take place in the midst of confusion. Especially, you cannot have hospitality in the throes of hostility. We wanted the program. The government of Antigua and Barbuda did everything. We recently spoke to Mr. Butch Stewart, less than 5 days ago, in fact. He was in Antigua. He met with the Prime Minister and myself. He wants to do the program. What he does not want to do is to do a program where there's going to be confusion, where there are going to be people demonstrating, and so on. So the approach that has been taken is to build stakeholder confidence and to build stakeholder consensus.
What's the strategy to achieve this?
The strategy there is we have a committee that's headed by Mr. Cartwright Marshall. He's been meeting with the various stakeholders. In fact, he is to meet with the parliamentary opposition very shortly. We understand from the address given by the new leader of the opposition that he is in support of the project, provided that there will be beach access for the public and that the vendors there will be accommodated. Well, that's a no-brainer because those were our concerns. And we have put in place a design for a modern beach park. And that beach park, we have nothing like that in Antigua. It will have restaurants, it will have facilities for vendors, children's playground, public bathrooms, parking facilities, all of those things. In other words, we're going to improve what's currently there, and we're going to put in place a modern public beach park. It will allow for public access, it will allow for the vendors to be accommodated.
In terms of dollars and cents, what sort of facility are we looking at here?
In terms of dollars and cents, the high figure would be 5 million EC dollars, and that's if we build all the facilities ourselves. Already the vendors have indicated that they would want to have their own facility, they would want to build their own or move what they have. We have no difficulty with that. The restaurants, if it's a case where the persons who will be given the franchise to operate those restaurants, if they want to build it, that's an option. So it could come right down to maybe $2 million. We've also included in that the acquisition of an acre of land, which would allow for even more beach access. And so that's been factored in also.
Right. So the question then is, when is government going to be ready to address the whole issue of minimum wage and, of course, compensation for work and qualifications? That has continued to be
in the government service.
In the government service.
Well, in the government service, I don't think we'll ever have a perfect picture. And that's because we're coming from a situation which I mentioned earlier, a lot of anomalies.
But there's always need for a better picture.
And that's what we're creating. But we won't necessarily create the perfect picture this year. And if I were to tell you the perfect picture will be created this year, then that just will not happen. What we're trying to do is improve on what we now have. And we expect that persons who work will be paid a salary commensurate with the work that they do. The interesting thing about pay is that I'm yet to meet someone who considers that they're adequately paid. I just have never met anyone who considers their wage to be an adequate wage. But I think that's a reality of life.
But isn't that an achievement of government?
Well, government will try to pay as best it can. And in fact, if you look at the way in which this administration has sought to compensate, we had a situation where wages were at a certain level in 2004. Many of the persons who were promised wage increases in 1994 never received it. It was this administration that gave, first of all, an 8% and then a 10% increase in wages. So under this administration, we have given public servants an 18% increase. And that doesn't include the 33% increase that was given to persons who were working at customs, or the 23% increase that was given to the police, or the 55% increase that was given to members of Gabatco in the tower. So these are things that we have done in real terms in order to improve the standard of wages in the public service.
Earlier you mentioned right-sizing the public sector. Are we planning, or are you hoping to introduce another section or segment of voluntary separation?
No. We tried voluntary separation already. At the moment, what we're looking at is a program to retool and retrain public servants. We do not believe it is necessary to engage in any form of retrenchment when you talk about right-sizing. What we need is not so much right-sizing, but right-fitting. At the moment, we have vacancies for public health nurses, we have vacancies in the prison, we have vacancies for police officers, the defense force. There are other areas where we need persons. I mentioned earlier that the service was designed many, many years ago, before the current technological advancements had even been thought of. In the new age, we need to retool and we need to get our public servants with fresh skills so that they meet the needs of today's age. And I don't think we need to downsize for that. What we need to do is to get these new skills in new positions so that government can indeed function more efficiently and that we get more value for money, or the taxpayer will get more value for the dollar.
Stick a pin there. When we come back, we'll be discussing the issue of the gaming sector. What is Antigua and Barbuda doing in terms of negotiations to get the U.S. still to comply with the 2004 WTO ruling? This is The Journal, and I'm Sean Thomas. There is still a stalemate between Antigua and Barbuda and the U.S. over the issue of internet gaming. We've seen hundreds of jobs lost here in Antigua and Barbuda through the demise of, or the fall off of the gaming sector. Where is Antigua and Barbuda with this?
We are keen to settle this matter with the United States, and we have been holding discussions with the United States Trade Representative's office. We hope that we will be able to arrive at a settlement. However, the reality is that in 2007, the World Trade Organization gave Antigua and Barbuda the option to suspend its obligations under the TRIPS. That's the agreement relating to intellectual property. That allows us to effectively suspend the TRIPS to the point where we can reap up to $21 million per year, or until the period of compliance is acceded to. In other words, if the United States does not bring itself into compliance with the obligations which were given at the time when it signed the WTO treaty, then that's a right that Antigua and Barbuda has. Now, we've tried not to do that, and we have engaged in discussions over a period of time in order to bring a settlement. But we are not satisfied with the way in which the discussions have been going. We do not think the offers that have been placed on the table seriously compensate us for the loss that we have suffered. There was a time, as you mentioned, when this industry employed almost 4,000 people. It's now less than 400 people. That has had a significant impact in terms of the disposable incomes of many young people. They were good jobs. We believe that it's possible for us to have something worked out with the USTR, and that's what we're trying to do.
Have you gotten any satisfactory word from the U.S. in terms of their willingness to resolve this issue?
Well, as you know, we recently approached the WTO with a view to making preparations to institute the proceedings that we're entitled to institute, which is to say, to suspend the obligations under the TRIPS. We, since then, have had indications from the USTR that there needs to be a resolution to this matter before the matter goes any further. On the 28th of January, it is expected that the matter will come back to the WTO, at which time the option will be clearly before us. And we are prepared to do that if we do not arrive at some form of satisfactory settlement. And so we expect that over the coming weeks, efforts will be made and we will be engaging the USTR in earnest with a view to arriving at a meaningful settlement which addresses the harm and injury suffered by Antigua and Barbuda as a result of the US placing the ban on cross-border trade in gaming, which is, I want to frame that correctly because many people say, oh, it's just a gambling dispute. But correctly speaking, what it is, it's a trade dispute. And that trade dispute has to do with trade across borders. And we're looking here at cross-border trade in services. And the service here is gaming service. And the US has prevented operators in Antigua and Barbuda from offering this service to consumers in the United States. And that's really the way the whole dispute is framed.
I just want to drop this in here. Where is the situation with the IHI investigation? How do you feel about the negotiations and this whole investigation? It has been going on for several years now.
The IHI investigation, as I know, was initiated many years ago by this administration, where Mr. Bob Lindquist investigated the fact that fraudulent payments were being made to an account in Bermuda held by a company which had certain Antiguan and Barbudan principles. Well, that's in the hands of the police. And for me personally, I can't speak to that other than to say it's in the hands of the police. I know other things that are investigated by the police involving persons who are not quite as high profile. Those matters seem to come to the courts. Those matters seem to be adjudicated upon. But this matter seems to be taking longer than I think most citizens of Antigua and Barbuda who are looking at this issue would expect. And so,
your stance, is it not politically motivated or just a
well, it's not. If it were politically motivated, then clearly this matter would have already reached the courts. But the fact that there is obviously no political interference is demonstrable, because clearly, I mean, I think implied in any question or suggestion of political interference is that the issue moves forward quickly because the political directorate would have so directed. But the fact that this matter is taking so long, I think that in itself suggests that there's no political interference.
It could be argued that that's a justice strategy, given the fact that elections are coming up, so you're waiting until then before you start pressing the hands.
Well, no, I can tell you that's not the case. That's not the case.
All right. The issue of the $21 million gaming, now, how satisfied are you that this will be addressed in your next round of negotiations, and how soon are you planning to?
Well, it is being addressed. It is being addressed, because if it's not addressed...
In fact, resolved.
Well, we can only hope that it will be resolved. From our vantage point, we are seeking a speedy resolution, but it takes two to tango. And we are hopeful that we will get a good resolution in this matter very shortly.
Over and over, we've been hearing about the issue of investment opportunities, What are the new avenues being explored for business development in Antigua and Barbuda?
Well, we believe that small businesses are very important to the economy of Antigua and Barbuda. And I spoke earlier about the things that we are doing to stimulate the development and the sustainable growth of small business development. But we also are looking at the outsourcing possibilities. And so the Investment Authority has recently established a unit known as the Outsource Antigua and Barbuda Unit. So Outsource Antigua and Barbuda is intended to really spearhead efforts to see how Antigua and Barbuda can offer itself as a place where people would want to come and do business, maybe for the manufacturing sector, or we're looking more in terms of the IT possibilities here. So that's one area that we're looking at. It's an area, of course, that we have to be competitive in, because it will only work if we can offer a superior quality product at a competitive price, because there will be no incentive for someone to outsource to Antigua and Barbuda if the price is going to be high and if the product is going to be inferior. So it's going to mean a higher degree of productivity or an alertness or a willingness to address the question of productivity. And it's also going to mean that we'll have to address questions of quality of product, whether it be a product that's a service or product that's a commodity. So that's something that we're pursuing. But none of these things are going to happen in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. These are things where you have to set the platform, where you have to go out and source potential investors in these fields, and you have to be prepared. And that's where I mentioned earlier, the type of things that we're doing in terms of preparing our population so that we can take advantage of these opportunities. But at the end of the day, let's not get away from it. Tourism is and will be, for the foreseeable future, our main industry and the mainstay of the economy. And our best bet is to position ourselves to take advantage of the rebound when it comes from the United States. I know in tourism, for example, they have recently launched and are developing an on-site marketing platform. I think that's going to do very well for Antigua and Barbuda.
Are you of the perception that cruise ships should begin to make financial contributions to states or ports or governments?
Well, that would be nice. What we were doing a few years ago and what I think we're continuing to do following the initial impact of the global recession is to partner with at least one major cruise line to help us develop and enhance our port facilities. It ties in the cruise line because they have a stake in bringing their boats in. It's happening in St. Martin, as I indicated. We had started discussions previously with Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines. I know some other jurisdictions have been working with other cruise lines. But to the extent that you can get cruise lines to invest in your port facilities, I think that's a good thing. But in terms of just making a contribution, they're not going to do that. They'll make an investment out of which they hope to get a return. But they're not going to pay you to come here. No, that's not going to happen. In this competitive global environment, you'd quicker pay them than for them to pay you.
In fact, there are many environmental areas that contributions can be made, yeah?
Well, absolutely.
All right. Now, bringing you back to the issue of the proposal for an outsourced Antigua and Barbuda initiative, who would the principals be? What sort of representation are you looking for to make up this, this unit?
Well, the Investment Authority currently is putting a group of its staff members into this unit. And I know that they are also working with a consultant to help to develop the full concept paper so that they can make the most of this potentially lucrative opportunity.
Budget 2013 projects, and I said projects because of course projections aren't always factual. 1.7 growth. What's the strategy to ensuring that we see this 1.7 growth in 2013?
Well, it has to do with the improvements that we are noting in the tourism sector, which is the main driver of the economy. And it's no coincidence that when the US and the UK go down, our tourism goes down. When the UK and the US go up, our tourism goes up. So I think that's one positive indicator. The second major factor that we'll be looking at is construction activity. I mentioned the fact that we expect the Department of Marine Services, we expect the State Insurance Corporation, those are two buildings, that will contribute towards growth. The Construct Antigua and Barbuda initiative with residential construction, that's been taken off nicely, and we're seeing the turnaround in terms of construction activity. That will also help us to achieve greater levels of growth. And then, of course, once we can get our citizenship by investment program going, that will also pump money into the economy, and that should further stimulate construction activity in some of the resort areas that we expect to be developed around the around the citizenship by investment program. So all of these, I think, indicate that we should see continued growth in the economy of Antigua and Barbuda.
1.7%. Do you think that is just a bit too ambitious given the fact that the economy is in the state that it's currently in?
No. I mean, the fact is, for this year, it is projected that we will achieve growth of 1.2%. And that is against a backdrop of sub-regional contraction of 0.4%. So I think, whilst we went through 3 years of contraction, we were putting our fiscal equation in order. We were making sure that we were bringing certainty, confidence, and credibility to the economy of Antigua and Barbuda. And if you want to move forward, you cannot move forward where there is no certainty. In other words, where people do not know where the government is going and where there is no confidence, because your fiscal equation is so out of whack. You're running such huge deficits. You're not meeting your obligations to your statutory corporations. You're not paying your debts. That doesn't create an atmosphere of certainty. And then credibility. Credibility is you say what you do and you do what you say. And if you say to somebody that this is a deal, then it's a deal. And if you're to make a certain payment, you make the payment, whether it is to be a local businessman or to an external investor. It also means that if you are to get development assistance of any sort, it may not be cash assistance, but it may be technical assistance. Technical assistance that we've been getting from the European Union. We've been getting it from the Department for Overseas Development in the United Kingdom, DFID, International Development, DFID. We're getting it from CEDA, the Canadians. We're getting it from CARICAD. We're getting it from CARTAC. These are all institutions, regional and international, the World Bank, the IMF. They have built their assistance to Antigua and Barbuda around our NEST program, the National Economic and Social Transformation Plan. It's homegrown. When people look at the National Economic and Social Transformation Plan, they can feel proud. You know why they can feel proud? Because young people like yourself are the persons responsible for that. That was first crafted in the Ministry of Finance, the Economy and Public Administration by young, bright, professional Antiguans and Barbudans. When they had done the first draft, it was then shared with the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank and the Caribbean Development Bank. After we had done that, we invited the IMF to assist us in implementing the National Economic and Social Transformation Plan. They accepted our NEST plan as the basis for the standby arrangement with the IMF. And with the IMF coming on board, it allowed us to get assistance from the World Bank. It allowed us to normalize and to restructure our debts through the Paris Club. And it has put us on a sustainable footing. That's what generates confidence, certainty, and credibility. With that platform, growth comes. Without that platform, either you get non-sustainable growth because you're only attracting people who are either criminal in mind or intent and who subsequently will be found out. I mean, when you look at some of the characters who've come to Antigua over the years, I mean, many of these people, I mean, we had Italians who came and were responsible for some of the developments in Antigua. In Italy, they fell foul of the law. The only major investment we had in Antigua between 1994 and 2004 was Alan Stanford. I don't need to tell you where he is now.
Your government has said in your preparations to the 2004 elections that investors are waiting to stand by. We're still waiting to see them. No,
just a second. You don't say that and run off. No. You as a journalist have a duty to go and look at the numbers. First of all, I challenge you to look at anything documented by the United Progressive Party at any time that we said that we had. I've heard a person say, you have investors waiting down the Sandy Island. Well, I mean, let's strip.
Sandy Island, that's exactly where we're going.
Let's strip away the absolutely, it's obviously facetious. I mean, in today's world, are we logically saying that there are people in a boat outside of Antigua waiting? I mean, does that really sound like something sensible to you? So first of all, let's debunk that. I mean, somebody on a platform may have said, oh, we have investors, you know, waiting outside. And the fact is, let us look at the facts. The facts. Confidence is what stimulates investment. Between 1994 and 2004, I challenge you as a journalist again, how many hotel properties were developed in Antigua? Actually developed. One, Carlisle Bay. One.
Is that enough? Are
one.
You satisfied with
Between
just one?
1994, we were not in office in 1994, and 2004, when we came to office, one, Carlisle Bay.
Right.
Between 2004 and 2009, Veranda, Sandals, Hermitage, expansion at Galley Bay, expansion at St. James's Club, expansion at Tradewinds, expansion at Blue Waters, Sugar Ridge Hotel, all of these built from scratch. Well, except those that I mentioned were expansions. Now, you'll hear persons say, oh, they were in the pipeline. Yes, but in the pipeline and actually being realized are two completely different things.
But it makes it easy if the platform would have already been laid.
Well, the platform, if again we can go back and establish it, What's the lane of the platform? I didn't even mention Nonsuch Bay. All of these happened under the UPP administration. In terms of foreign direct investment, we had about 3 times as much foreign direct investment under the UPP administration as the previous 10 years. Of course, you'll hear people say, under the previous administration, you had Mill Reef, okay, 1950s. You had Jolly Harbour, the mid-1980s. You had Half Moon Bay, mid-1962. You had all these other hotels. Yeah, those took place over a 28-year period. But I'm saying, look at the 10 years, and this is where we have to judge policies. The policies that were being pursued, eventually those policies unraveled, and they were not sustainable. And that's why we saw growth from 7%, 3%, 2%. When we came in, 2%. Our first 5 years of government, average of 7% growth. I'm just saying these are statistics that we cannot argue with. But in the popular parlance, you go there, people say there was no investment. But I just mentioned, if you looked around Antigua in 2007 and you tried to find a mason, you couldn't find a mason. You couldn't find a carpenter. I'm merely saying these things happened under a UPP administration. They didn't happen before. And they didn't happen before because there was no confidence.
Hold your thoughts. Don't go away. We journal in the issues of finance, the economy, and public administration with the Honorable Harold Lovell. Stay with us. You are watching The Journal. Welcome back. Minister Lovell, you've mentioned many hotel developments, but occupancy rates are still very low according to the HTA, the Antigua and Barbuda Hotel and Tourist Association. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, and even whilst I speak of occupancy rates, I didn't even mention the fact that we had 41 small properties developed between 2005 and 2009, where we offered special concessions. That never happened before in Antigua. 41 new properties. You can see them all around Antigua.
You can't get people to fill them.
Not only that, what we have is a situation whereby the question of occupancy, which has always occupied Antigua and Barbuda, you have the slow season and you have the high season. During the high season, and let's speak of now, if you went around any of the hotels, I mean, we had someone who was coming, he's an investor. He wanted to be here for Christmas. He tried 6 of the hotels that he considered to be hotels that he would want to stay in, mainly the top-end hotels. All of them were full. Go to any of the hotels.
That's the general trend, to be full between December and January.
And
what happens after that?
During the slow period, the idea must be to improve what occupancy rates you have. But the reality of the Caribbean, not just Antigua, the reality of the Caribbean, because it has to do with the fact that we're mainly a weather-driven and beach-driven destination, like most of the Caribbean. People will travel during the winter because they want to get away from the cold. Now, if you show me a country in the Caribbean that has successfully managed to keep hotels full all year round, then I want to see that country. There are other countries, for example, that may have the citizenship by investment, where certain persons may come because they have a stake in a particular condominium. That's the way you grow your product during the slow season. Also, residential tourism. Now, we've been pushing residential tourism, again, condominium type development, where you encourage persons to buy second homes. That's what drives Barbados during the slow period. But apart from that, the reality is persons travel during the winter months and they don't travel as much during the slow months. I mean, as you say, I mean, if you know of somebody who has the magic formula, I mean, everyone would be very keen to hear it.
Now, Antigua and Barbuda has gone to the IMF, and the IMF is recommending fiscal consolidation. What's your thoughts on this? Is this the way for us to go?
First of all, I don't know where you read that the IMF recommended fiscal consolidation.
There has been a regional article. I can show it to you.
I would love to see it. But in terms of our fiscal consolidation program was designed by Antiguan and Barbudan technicians with the CDB and the central bank. We sought the assistance of the IMF through a standby arrangement to assist us in implementing our fiscal consolidation plan. Now, fiscal consolidation is not an IMF concept. Fiscal consolidation simply says that your expenditure should be in line with your revenues.
Is Antigua and Barbuda there?
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. We have moved from a position where we had massive deficits over several years to a point now where we have an overall surplus. Now, not an overall surplus, a primary surplus. Now, I've tried to explain this on several occasions. But the primary surplus basically doesn't take into account your interest payments. So that means it's like your checkbook or your current account, whereby whatever you put in should be equivalent to what you take out, or else you're going to have a deficit. Now, your overall balance takes into account your interest payments. Now, we have had to finance that overall deficit through funds from the IMF and from the CDB. Those are the main areas that we finance the overall deficit from. But the way the needle is moving, we're moving in a direction whereby, for the first time, we are now balancing our revenues with our expenditure. Those are good things. It's no different if you're running a shop. If you're spending more than what you're making, you're going to make a loss, and eventually you're going to be out of business. If you're running a country or if you're running a household budget. That's where we're going. But fiscal consolidation, it's a universal concept. And if you are running a proper government, then you observe the principles of good fiscal management.
Let me just draw your attention to the issue of the greatest summer festival that we keep promoting, Antigua and Barbuda's Carnival, year after year. People finding it difficult to be paid, and persons not wanting to participate because it's either being paid late or not being paid at all. After 50 years, the festival is still not independent. How do you feel
Well, I
about
don't know if the festival will ever be independent. What I know they were able to do this year, I know they were able to pay the artists and the performers. But what had been happening is that they were carrying over balances year on year. What we did this year, and I said to them, let us deal with the artists for this year and pay them. We consolidate the arrears from the past, and we're going to pay off those arrears. We're making arrangements so that we can clear those as a bulk sum and treat it as a debt. But let us not keep carrying arrears from year to year. And so the point is, Carnival will never ever pay for itself. You know,
but it should be one of the key revenue earners for the country.
Well, no, I don't think Carnival pays for itself anywhere. I mean, you know, the cost of producing a Carnival, if Carnival were to pay for itself, you'd be paying $100 to go into a show. If it were to pay for itself, it can't pay for itself. It has to be subsidized. You have to look at what it does to the overall economy of Antigua and Barbuda. And so you have to look at the car rentals that go up, the hotel occupancy that goes up. You have to look at the business activity that takes place. That's really the positive impact of Carnival. But if you had to make Carnival pay for itself, you'd have to drop a number of the shows, which are just not economical. And then even those shows that you're going to, you'd have to pay a lot more.
So you're saying that the strategy going forward is to bring, to not have expenses coming from year to year.
Well,
and that would settle things out.
No, it won't. I mean, well, at the very least, Carnival is given a budget, and Carnival is subsidized by the government of Antigua and Barbuda. It's subsidized to the tune of between $1 and $2 million per year. There was a time when we would give them $1 million, and then you would have expenditure exceeding that. What we're trying to do is to make sure that Carnival stays within its budget. I have to say that in 2012, I think they did a reasonably decent job in terms of making sure that there was sufficient sponsorship to carry some of the shows and to make the necessary arrangements so that they would not be incurring further arrears. But Carnival as itself will never, in my view, pay for itself. But what we must ensure is that the subsidy that is given by the government of Antigua and Barbuda, that is used in a prudent and responsible way, and they stay within the budget that they've been given.
All right. Finally, the issue of your new portfolio, information, broadcasting, telecommunications, in fact, not telecommunications, but information and broadcasting. Yeah. Are you satisfied with the output of our state-owned ABS TV?
I believe ABS TV has suffered from a lack of resources, and I believe that going forward we need to address that. And so I agree with Minister Mansour when he notes the fact that ABS Radio and Television have not been given the resources necessary, and we have to continue to address that as an issue. I believe that in today's world, you must have proper communication with the public. A government must be able to let the people who are paying the taxes and who have invested their support with the particular government, whichever the government is, that people are entitled to know what's happening. And I think that's why the Prime Minister decided that he wanted to put information with public administration, so that there's a close linkage between public administration, which is cross-ministerial. It goes across all the ministries. There are communications officers from all the different ministries. And the idea is really to bring everybody under public administration, so that as the public administration portfolio looks at what's happening throughout government, it's easier to communicate this to the public at large and to the taxpayers. And I think that's important. And insofar as broadcasting is concerned, ABS radio, ABS television, the broadcasting wing of government, I think it's only natural that that would fit in with public information. And so I think the Prime Minister's vision is that we get a better fit with public administration and public information and public broadcasting.
There's been a salary increase signed off some time ago. You're hoping to address that for the staff there? Or here, in fact?
Well, I'll need to hear more about that.
Okay.
So once I hear more about that, I'm sure we'll be able to look at it. And within the constraints that we function, obviously we want to make sure that everybody is properly remunerated.
Your final comments, prospects, of course, a projected 1.7% growth for Antigua and Barbuda in 2013. Of course, the issue of public administration and finance. Is Antigua and Barbuda in safe hands?
Antigua and Barbuda is in very safe hands. And you know what we say is we've reached too far to turn back now. And we have put in place the necessary measures which will ensure sustainability. We can meet our obligations with some difficulty, and I have to say that, with some difficulty, because we are not over the hump yet. In terms of our revenue, we need to continue to make sure that we can bring in more revenue so that we can provide the services to the people of this country in the way that we would want. So the needle is moving in the right direction. That's the most important thing. What we cannot do is to engage in any form of reckless policy making. For example, to abolish revenue sources, not knowing how we're going to replace or replenish those sources. Because that would mean, if we wipe out, for example, personal income tax in one go, that's $59 million that we're projecting this year. Now, if you drop short by $59 million when you are already in constrained circumstances, it means that either you're going to have to send home people, or you're going to have to cut your services so drastically that it's going to have a very adverse impact on the economy. But what we've done, we've said, okay, fine, let's look at the whole question of tax reform. And we have set up a tax review task force. It's solid, Antiguans and Barbudans, a lot of professionals. We have something like 7 accountants from all the major firms and top individuals who practice as accountants. We have all the major institutions in Antigua and Barbuda represented, and we've said everything is on the table. So in other words, rather than just say, oh, we're going to abolish, or we're going to do away with, we're saying, look, let's look at this thing in a mature, deliberate way. Let's first of all study the impact, and let's see how we can come up with something that is even better than what we have. So we haven't ruled out anything, but I'm cautious about any form of reckless policy initiatives which could have an adverse impact on the ordinary working people of Antigua and Barbuda.
Thank you so much, Minister Lovell.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You've been watching The Journal. I'm Sean Thomas. Remember to email us your tough questions at thejournalantigua@gmail.com. That's all for now. Do take care. Enjoy what's left of your evening. Bye-bye.